Spoilers are going to follow, so be warned. Abigail is a 2024 horror movie from Universal Pictures and Radio Silence. It's directed by Matt Bettinelli-Olpin and Tyler Gillette, and they're the directors of Scream 6 and Ready or Not, which are both fun, modern horror movies. I think the key word there is fun, because a lot of people are describing Abigail as being fun. And the film follows 6 kidnappers played by Melissa Barrera, Dan Stevens, Catherine Newton, Angus Cloud, Kevin Durant, and William Catlett, who kidnap a young girl after her ballet class and drive her to an abandoned mansion, where they've been gathered by Giancarlo Esposito's character, who's kind of like the organizer of this kidnapping, and he explains that they are kidnapping this daughter of a really wealthy person whose name he doesn't tell them, and they're going to demand a $50 million ransom. All the kidnappers have to do is just hang out in the house, watch the girl, and wait for the ransom, which is the setup of the movie. Personally, I did think this movie was not that bad. It does have a lot of good moments and some really interesting ideas. There are some key elements of this film that I thought were kind of broken and could have used some fixing, but it wasn't as broken as a movie like, let's say, Madam Web. I don't really think anything's that bad. This movie just could use some tweaking and it would have been very good. So let's go through that and discuss how Abigail could have been better. A minor issue with this film is how it decides to tell and not show key bits of information. Now, to be fair, most of the movie is set in one location, a barren mansion, which I admire. It's creepy and makes for a fun, spooky, almost slumber party-esque Scooby-Doo atmosphere. This is probably why a lot of the people are describing this film as being fun or a blast. It isn't terrifying, it has comedy in there, and overall, there's this fun chemistry to the cast that makes it worth watching. But with that, because this film is so claustrophobic and set within this one location, the film is stuck relaying pieces of information to us, which kind of messes things. And I think if you have a movie like this set in one location, you don't really need to do that. In the movie's defense, I will say they made a great job exploring this mansion. It's set in one location, but it always feels like we're discovering new rooms or locations. It always feels like we're going to different places. It doesn't feel like they're just locked in this one boring space. The filmmakers make use of this large mansion, and I like that. There's a dining room, a grand hall, a creepy basement area, a kitchen, a bunch of bedrooms these kidnappers hole up in. There's the child's room, the weird, creepy gated entrance, a hidden security enclave with a bunch of cameras, library. I mean, I really did like how where some movies can feel boring and not properly directed if you're just using one space, Abigail doesn't have that problem. It's almost entirely in one location, and it's interesting to watch. But where it does falter is how it divulges information. See, the characters are all from these criminal backgrounds, and I give the movie some credit for early on having a scene where you kind of get to know them when the kidnappers are drinking and bored, and they're just holed up in this mansion and start playing tricky games and betting on who will be able to figure out what information is true about them just from their outward appearance. And Melissa Barrera's character wows them all by reading their life stories just by glancing at them. And she just kind of does this to all of them. She goes, oh, you're just hired muscle. You're a former cop. You're a teenage runaway who did this for the kick. She kind of shows them all she's good at reading people. And for the beginning, this works. It almost feels natural as they're hanging out. They're drinking. They're bored. Each character is bringing their own personality to the discussion. The stoner guy is being a stoner. The cop is being interrogative and nosy. The teenage runaway girl is just acting like a teenage girl. And while there's a bit of needed exposition to it to explain who these characters are, the movie works because it needs to get this information out, and it does it in an effective way that isn't too obvious, as opposed to, I don't know, like in Batman vs Superman, where Wonder Woman just gets an email showing all the Justice League characters. I don't know. That's kind of a bad example, but there's good ways to reveal information about your characters without being too obvious, and being set mostly in one location that relies on dialogue. But there's a flip side to this, and it's one the movie should be able to operate with, but it just doesn't. See, the kidnappers think they have this under control. The little girl is subdued in the room. They think they'll just get the ransom money, leave her, call it a day, and get rich. But everything changes when they find out who the girl's father is. See, Dan Stevens' character, who's a former cop turned criminal, tries to find out just what he's dealing with. So he goes into the girl's room and interrogates her into telling him who her father is, who they're stealing money from, and she reveals her father is some guy named Lazar. And based on the look on Dan Stevens' face, he's not really a good guy. No, they're really scared of this guy. And when he relays to the rest of the kidnappers, well, the same thing, they're all terrified. Now they think they're going to be killed. This guy who they're trying to demand a ransom from is some highly powerful and vicious crime boss, and now even Dan Stevens, who is supposed to be the chill, no-nonsense de facto leader of the group, wants out. And there's all this tension now. There's just one problem: we don't actually know who Lazar is. We've never seen him before. And yeah, I understand this argument. Oh, not showing him makes him more mysterious, so you don't really need to depict this person. Oh, you can leave it to the imagination who the girl's father is. Oh, now showing Lazar just adds to the mystery, and I want to know who he is. And yeah, all that's true. It's just that the movie keeps harping on this. They keep saying they're afraid of this guy and we should all be terrified of him, but we've never actually seen him. We're just told about him, and this is where it gets messy, at least in terms of a simple story structure. See, all the kidnappers all start sharing stories, which is crucial to the plot, about what this guy Lazar has done. Oh, he has this powerful hitman, Valdez, who does all his dirty work for him. Once he killed 3 people who flipped on the crime boss, and he did it in a high-rise hotel room without being seen, which was surrounded by federal agents. Like, how did he do it? And I get it adds to the intrigue and it gives it almost an urban legend feeling, but at the same time, it just isn't much, and it leaves you with all these unseen characters you want to know more about. It doesn't show you any of this. Instead of just sticking to their guns, the movie gets needlessly complicated, with these kidnappers all worried they're going to be killed by the crime boss's vicious hitman. And I get it, there's intrigue here. And then when the kidnappers start getting dropped like flies, you're wondering what's doing this, or who's doing this. And if you haven't seen the annoying trailers, which in an effort to get people to see the movie kind of reveal a great important part halfway through, you'll probably be intrigued by the first half of the movie, which is pretty good, and where the mystery is. Who's killing the kidnappers? Who's trapped in the house with them? There's also this delightful irony to having these kidnappers who in some respect are likable and shouldn't be likable, but you see them for who they are. They're not trying to hurt anyone. They aren't psychopaths. They aren't out to hurt the little girl. They just want money. So when the story wants you to root for them to escape, it does work. The idea of these kidnappers being trapped in the house thinking they're going to get away with the ransom, now having to fight for their lives, is interesting, and there's an ironic hook to it. But at the same time, you find out the main plot reveal about midway through the film, which is actually that the girl they kidnapped is actually a centuries-old vampire, and this whole ransom setup is basically a trap to lure a bunch of unsuspecting fools into her house for her to feast on. This is where the movie starts to unravel, and while I do like the twist here, and I think it's a great use of irony, these kidnappers trying to escape from this little girl they took in the first place, I think it could have been much more effective. Another key issue is the movie is just too overcomplicated at parts for its own good. There's too many reveals and cliches, too many elements that should have been acts to just make this a simple yet effective cat and mouse thriller. Like I said, the whole reveal with the girl's father and the robbers realizing she is the hitman, Valdez, that they've heard stories about, just really did not need to be there. In the movie's defense, I do like them trying to give a bit of backstory. I do like them trying to flesh out the world and kind of show that this girl's a menace beyond this movie. Oh, she's killed people before. She's really violent. She's actually a monster. I did like that. The only issue here is we don't really need that. Not to mention, there's a great scene later in the film where they discover a pool full of bodies, which really indicates all you need to know, that she's been killing people all this time. You don't need this whole story with the mobster. It just overcomplicates things and presents us with a scenario we're never going to get to see or visualize. The whole thing with this girl's father being a crime boss feels tacked on to make the ransom plot work, and her being this immortal hitman is kind of interesting, but just doesn't really need to be there, and just adds all this extra backstory that really just complicates things. I get they wanted to explain why they'd robbed from them in the first place. They assume she comes from money. There's just so much backstory. It kind of spends so much time explaining this filler information to us than relying on actual scares. And the film just doesn't need this information. It could have just made the girl a vampire and left it at that. A 90-minute film where these kidnappers are being picked off one by one and are wondering what's getting them. And then you reveal it's a vampire at work. That's all you need. You don't need the backstory of how long she's been alive, or she was a hitman for the mafia, or that she knows a lot about them. I mean, to be fair, I do like this part at the end where they kind of have her cornered and she's taunting them, knowing about all their vices and all the things they've done wrong in their lives. I think it's interesting, and I like her taunting them, like, oh, you're a former junkie, you were a good cop until you got your friends killed, you just joined this crew to get accepted. I like her getting under their skin, but beyond that, it's just unneeded. And as I said earlier, if the film was just a simple cat and mouse thriller, I would have loved it. Instead, it's just trying to weave and juggle all these elements together, and it just kind of struggles to maintain this simple tonal consistency of tension. I do like Abigail, but I wish the film gave her less backstory and more time being a crazy menace bitch. There's a few great scenes with her, but in my opinion, not enough. They could have done so much more with what they had, and they didn't. I mean, in the movie's defense, I do like them being picked off one by one at the beginning, and then wondering who's doing it. You have tension there. You have the robbers turning on each other, and when you see it's actually the girl, you go, oh shit, this is kind of crazy. But after that happens, it struggles to maintain that level of scary, and just weaves between a horror film that isn't really horrifying, and some comedy that isn't really entirely funny. Like I said, the first act of this movie is probably the best when there's all this mystery, but it just kind of fails at that point on. And one of the biggest issues I had that kind of left me having a bad taste in my mouth was the movie's ending. I really thought it was unearned and felt a bit forced. Also just highly unsatisfying and not really as cathartic as it should have been. So like I mentioned before, they really try to flesh out the characters and give the backstories. You really do get to care about these kidnappers, even though they're kidnappers. And with Melissa Barrera's character, you get this really interesting, although cliche story moment that she has a son who she wants to get back to. And this is what she tells little girl Abigail before she finds out she's a vampire. And I kind of like this building trust between them. It gives them a relationship that Abigail doesn't really have with the other characters. And I like that. I like that they give you something to latch onto with Melissa Barrera's character. And at the end of the movie, after most of the kidnappers have been killed or picked off by Abigail, even the teenage runaway girl gets turned into a vampire and then she gets killed. That just leaves two kidnappers, played by Dan Stevens and Melissa Barrera. And at this point, the movie's just kind of run out of steam, and they go into a basement where all of a sudden they find a control room where, lo and behold, Gus, who's in the film earlier as the organizer of these group of kidnappers, is sitting in a room surrounded by security cameras. And it's kind of like he's been a master planning this the whole time. Okay, but not exactly. He just has a pair of fangs, and he says, "Oh, Abigail turned me, and because of this, I have to help her find and kill people." Isn't really that big of a reveal or anything. And then he just instantly says, "Oh, I'm kind of tired of being a vampire. What if we just team up and kill Abigail together?" Which just kind of comes out of nowhere. And then he goes, "Oh, I could turn you, Dan Stevens, into a vampire." And Dan Stevens just goes, "Fuck it. I'm in enough deep shit already. At this point, might as well just become a vampire." And it just kind of comes out of nowhere too. So then Dan Stevens, who's now a vampire, kills Gus. And then he's on this bloodlust high for his first time as a vampire and just decides, "Oh, I'll kill Melissa Barrera." Then there's this final battle between the two of them in the house, and part of me just felt really unsatisfied with this ending for several reasons. Firstly, the antagonism between Dan Stevens and Melissa Barrera was there, but it doesn't feel like enough to justify the two of them totally clashing heads at the end of the movie. Like, yeah, we get it. They had some hatred at the beginning. He was saying, "You're a junkie, and I'm a police officer." And they kind of have this beef and butting heads early on, but it just doesn't feel like enough to justify him trying to kill her. Another thing that really takes away is Abigail's not the main villain anymore. Like, yeah, they all work to defeat her, but in the end, it's just Dan Stevens teaming up against Melissa Barrera. And I guess this is because they think, oh, it'd be uncomfortable to watch them murder a child, even though she is a vampire. And I just think the reveal that Gus has been working in the house all along, but is kind of working for Abigail, is just kind of underwhelming. Like, it would have worked more if he was the lead vampire all along, or Abigail's father, Lazar, the guy who they've been so afraid of. And while I think that would have been a bit cliche, and I was kind of expecting that, I would have liked it more than just him being some random henchman who gets killed right away. It just doesn't work or feel as effective as it could have. I think a better ending would have been that Gus had been hiding in a coffin the whole time, under the house, has been waiting for his daughter Abigail to kill all these people, and then he shows up as the final boss after Melissa Barrera is left alive, and he has to make sure she dies. I think that would have worked much better and been much more interesting than just Dan Stevens turning on Melissa Barrera for no reason at all. And them having to fight each other just doesn't feel effective at all. The movie just ends with Abigail being unable to really die, and she lets Melissa Barrera go, but right at that moment, her real father shows up. And the movie really just pulls a dick move here where they pan up to reveal Abigail's true father, who's just some random dude with fangs. I guess this is Lazar. I guess he might even be Dracula, but the movie doesn't really reveal who he is. I mean, the end credits just say father, and it's not like he's played by some famous actor or anything. He's just this random guy who played Ozymandias in Watchmen. And I guess the ending just feels so ineffective here, like, because why does this guy let Melissa Barrera go? And why isn't there some final fight between them? Why did they not get some big name actor or even Chris Sarandon from Fight Night? I think that would have been more effective and honestly a cool Easter egg. But instead, it's just some random dude who shows up for his daughter, and that's it. They just let the main woman go. Like, it's kind of a tease. It's kind of like at the end of Black Adam, how they reveal, oh, Superman's here, I'm gonna fight you, but they just don't do anything with that. It's just the end. Like, okay, I guess they're setting up for a sequel, but why not show us who this girl's father is now? Why not have him try to defend his daughter and fight Melissa Barrera? Why is he just some random reveal at the end and no one even knows who he is? And then it just ends with Melissa Barrera being the only kidnapper to survive, and she leaves the house, kind of drives off into the sunset. Another thing I just really didn't get is they just don't show her reuniting with her son or escaping. The whole reason she wanted to escape, to start over, to be with this kid. I mean, I guess it's kind of implied, but they just don't show it, and she just drives off into the sunset. I don't know, just ending it with her driving in this uplifting music, it just leaves so much more to be desired, and it's not really that cathartic. I mean, if you want to end your movie properly, you can't just turn two characters against each other like they do with Dan Stevens and Melissa Barrera, unless you build up that tension properly. Unless you establish these motives for why they hate each other early on, which the movie kind of does, but it just isn't enough. What you could do is make Abigail fight with them until they kill her. Don't let her survive. Maybe she comes back at the end, like, at the very last scene, like in Carrie, she's alive. Or maybe her father shows up and it's the Dracula guy and it's some big reveal and they have to fight him, and, that would be a better ending, honestly. What's the purpose of establishing this guy at the end if he's just going to appear for a minute, let you go, and that's it? It just doesn't work. So I'll keep things brief and try to wrap up here, but I wanted to get back to my earlier point. When you clicked on this video, many of you may have thought the title was kind of clickbait, and well, in some respects, I am trying to draw an audience, but when it comes to horror being ruined, Abigail does suffer from some problems. It's funny, but not too funny. There are lots of jokes, and the chemistry is there between this dynamic group of criminals. Angus Cloud plays the stoner guy, and at first, the humor, I guess, kind of stems from him, but then he dies, and we find out that this little girl is a vampire, and the humor comes from that. This group of kidnappers trying to stop this little girl vampire, which itself feeds into irony. And it kind of works. It's funny. It's a good time. It makes for some fun moments, like this little girl in a ballet dress effortlessly taking down these criminal adults. And well, that's a gold move. It's smart. It's just like everything else. The horror doesn't really work because of that. It's not scary because we aren't scared of Abigail. It's funny, moreover. And because the kidnappers aren't terrified and they make wisecracks and overall don't turn this into a terrifying situation, it isn't really scary. In fact, the beginning, where we don't know who's killing them, is the most scary because we don't know what's causing this. It's unknown and there's mystery. And combine that with mysterious deaths, it brews fear. You're wondering who's killing them. There's some tension there. When you find out who's doing the killing and we get these fun moments, it doesn't really allow the film to be scary, if you get what I mean. I think Abigail may be a fun time at the movies, but it just could have had a simpler story and been scarier and still had the same plot. That I did like a lot about Abigail. It is fun. It does, bring this great kind of joy from this little girl killing kidnappers. Like, yeah, they do a good job at that. It just isn't scary. I think you can mix horror and comedy well. Just look at Cabin in the Woods or even the original Scream. But you need to find a balance and need to build an effective ending. And with that, you can have great moments where the kidnappers are trying to outrun a child they've kidnapped, and that itself leaves so much for a great story. But with that, you need to balance comedy and horror. Because if you don't really scare people, or don't make your film righteously funny, or have a plot that's pretty easy to follow and effectively told, what you might have is a movie that's just going to be forgotten a few days later.